Thank you so much, Dana. I really appreciate that. That was very kind of you. I'm a little overwhelmed, but I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm so regretting, I'm really glad we're recording this. I'm so regretting, though, I'm not being able to see your faces. I mean, I think it's probably appropriate to not show your face because we're recording, although it really is up to you ultimately. But I just wish I could look you all in the eye, and I wish we were in person to be able to do that. Although, of course, as we're all recognizing, the moment we're in is creating, it's a classic crisis, right? It's creating these amazing opportunities and these amazing risks that we're all experiencing. I would be tone deaf to not speak to the moment we're in before launching into my presentation. I have a PowerPoint. I'm sitting here thinking about whether or not I'm going to use it. I probably will. Sometimes visuals are nice, but you know, it's the term unprecedented has been thrown around, and it's starting to sound a little overused, but it doesn't feel like it's overused. It feels like we're in a moment of tremendous challenge, and depending on where you sit and how you view things, potentially tremendous hope. As it ties to our subject today, yeah, for whatever reason in my life, I was called to deal with money. It wasn't what I thought I was going to do. I certainly didn't imagine. I was not one of those people who, you know, as a kid thought it would be really fun to be in finance or any of that. In fact, the idea of business or finance literally gave me a headache and made me kind of feel nauseous. I didn't have a great relationship with money as a concept as a child and as a young adult, and didn't even really begin to kind of connect to what I think was my core vocation until I was nearly 40, actually. Mine is a sort of odd story in terms of how I got into the work I got into, but it does, like many of us, I suspect I was drawn to tackle my own internal issues around money and how it related to, for me, sort of this foundational sense of unease and disconnection. I grew up in a small town that was very poor, frankly. I mean, it's sort of like the northernmost tip of Appalachia up in Western PA. Almost entirely white, almost entirely second generation recipients of some form of welfare support. Very low employment rates, increasingly high rates of crime. And I grew up in a family that had a family business that did relatively well. It had been around, in fact, it's still around. It's 115 years old this summer. And so the business was one of the employers in the town. One of only a couple, really, by the time I came along. And this disconnect between my family having and everyone not having was very alive for me from a very young age. And what I couldn't know then, but do know now, is that that was the tip of the iceberg of what was going to become this dramatic, the dramatic levels of income inequality we see today. That was just the start, really, in the 70s. So anyhow, that's the backdrop for why or part of the backdrop for why I felt called to this work. So my thesis today, and for those of you who availed yourself of the exercises I sent, these are kind of standard things we use when we're talking to people about sort of trying to get clear on what their own money stories are. And the limitation of any kind of focus on the individual is it can become disconnected from the broader cultural context or moment or the systemic issues. And so I want to state sort of upfront that my view of this is to make larger systemic change, you know, that work begins at home to a certain extent. It doesn't stop at home. And it's not as if home is some sort of isolated thing away from all the other, in the other contexts, but we are invited in to begin to do individual work. So a lot of the exercises begin with thinking about your own memories and thinking about your embeddedness in a family system, and then, you know, of course, in a larger system. So I'm going to kind of clip through some of the PowerPoint, the little presentation I'm doing, I developed when I was asked to do some work for the Candler School of Theology, which is where I got my divinity degree. It's the seminary embedded at Emory University in Atlanta. And they were working on how to help people who were likely to enter the ministry deal with, you know, money issues. Institutional religion tends to be almost the absolute worst institution from my perspective in dealing with money. Despite the fact that in the Christian tradition, in the historical gospels, money is like the dominant topic, right? It's the thing that Jesus is always talking about. But the church doesn't deal with it very well. And certainly they wanted to begin to give the pastor some training on this. So this is the gestation of this PowerPoint. So I'm gonna share my screen and put up some stuff here. And we'll start here. So, so the title of the presentation was simply Money as a Guide to Soul. There's a lot to unpack, like what do you mean by soul? What do you mean by guide, et cetera, et cetera. I'm gonna kind of glance over that. I'm happy to take that question later. I'm gonna kind of plow through, but suffice it to say, this idea that working with your money is a spiritual practice, working with your relationship with money is a spiritual practice, and that working with your relationship with money is a foundational practice for beginning to get clear about how to use it in more productive ways to make social change. That's my fundamental argument. So let me see if I can make my PowerPoint advance now. Let's try this. Okay, so I always like to just start with a very simple question, which is, what is money? And if we were in a group, I would take your answers. There's a sense in which what money is obvious. And there's another sense in which it's the deeper you go into thinking about what we're talking about, the more confusing it becomes. Even for economists, it turns out. We certainly are finding that out in this moment as we're seeing major economic experiments take place and have been taking place now for the last several years. But at a base level, you know, one of the common definitions is it's simply a medium of exchange that facilitates trade. It could be, you know, puka shells, or it could be tulips, or it could be something else, but we call it money. I would say that certainly is an aspect of it. It's a store of value. Again, for those of you who have done any economic theory, you'll know that currency, as in like the dollars we have in our pocket, or increasingly no longer in our pocket, but in a digital universe, may or may not be a store of value. That is to say, does money actually keep pace with, you know, the ability to buy goods and services? Depends on what direction inflation is heading, et cetera, et cetera. We could get into a lot of interesting conversations, but fundamentally, as we deal with it, we accumulate it. So we think of it in some way as a store of value for future use. I always liked this particular definition, that for which you trade your life energy. That comes from a guy named Joe Dominguez. Some of you may have heard of him. He wrote a book called Your Money or Your Life back in the, I think, late 70s. It sort of became a frugality manifesto. His basic thesis was, you know, chasing a dollar was an empty promise. And what you needed to do was learn how to, you know, basically recognize getting on the wheel and always seeking more was a dead end street spiritually and emotionally. It was certainly one of the first books I ever read when I started thinking about getting into the business I'm in. And then, of course, for those of you who have a a Christian background, you'll recognize this, or a Judeo-Christian background, that money is in fact the root of all evil. The technical quote is actually, the love of money is the root of all evil. But clearly money's relationship to influence and power and all the negative ways in which that has been used can't be denied. There may be yet more definitions of this. If you have one that we haven't covered or you think is unique, please feel free to toss it up there in the chat room. I can't see the chat room, but I'm sure Diane would be happy to tell us if something pops up as we go along. I think of money as all those things. I also think of looking at our relationship with money. I think of it as a lens, and a lens through which we might view our lives. That might sound a little comprehensive, but I think because of the role it plays in our lives today, I don't think that's actually hyperbolic. I think it's true. That tracking the money, you know, they always say following the money in your own life may lead you to some revelations about what you actually value rather than what you think you value. That is to say, if you really want to know what you care about, try and spend some time in your checkbook or in your bank statements and see where the money goes. And so the idea here that, I guess what I'm pressing at is there's this unconscious element of it. There's this unconscious way in which money flows through our lives. And so part of this work and part of the nature of doing any kind of spiritual practice, which is what I'm claiming here, is this constant revisiting of how the money flows and where it flows to. And to the extent that we can get closer and closer to consciousness, where the money is actually flowing in the ways we really want it to, that are really impacting what we want to in the world, getting us what we want. I mean, that's the work. And it's work and it's practice. And you'll notice I say practice, not product. My experience, both personally and professionally, is that I haven't seen anybody who's like fully arrived there, where it's all exactly like they want it. But I certainly have experienced people who, whose consciousness about their money and what it does is significant, and it's a function of a lifelong practice, I think, of paying attention to that.
Maggie, this
Yes.
is Diane.
Yes.
Lynn Murphy Rivera, one of our members, submitted one of the definitions that she's heard as money as a reflection of self and self-worth.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Money as a reflection of self. Yeah. Yes. Both maybe consciously and unconsciously. Right. So, yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So, my experience is that for many of us, money is fraught. Money is a location of emotion that on balance tends to be more negative than positive. This isn't true for everyone. I certainly have encountered people who, because of how they were raised or because of their own circumstances, seem to have a better balance. I'll say for myself, my own relationship with money, at least at the beginning of my work on it, was fraught with a kind of level of anxiety and fear and shame that was somewhat inchoate. It wasn't like, it wasn't precisely like I was ashamed because I had done X. It was just this kind of ick sense, this sort of ick feeling. And I think this is still more true than false, that money, I mean, this is, you've probably heard this phrase, I think it's true. Speaking about money with one another or in a group is still really quite taboo. Most people do not feel super comfortable, even with people they know intimately, talking about money. Of course, healthy relationships, the couple can do that, but in certainly many relationships, 70% of divorces marriages blow up as a consequence of money and the inability to come to terms with one's relationship with it or get on the same page. I think there are reasons why this is the case. And I'm going to give you sort of 3 areas why I think this is the case. I don't mean this to be um, the only reasons. These are just some things that came to my mind as I was thinking about this. Certainly the time period we are living in. We're living in a hyper financialized world where money now and the having of money is a direct linkage to our essential survival. This was not, of course, always the case. I mean, there were, when I'm doing this in a group, I usually have people raise their hand. You can think about your own life. If they knew people in their family line, like did their great grandparents, for example, have the knowledge of essential survival? Were they able to farm and provide most of their own food, for example? Such that they, you know, they could subsist. They maybe didn't live high, but they weren't going to go hungry. In my own family line, my father's parents were immigrants. They came in the early 1900s. My father grew up in the Great Depression. I was sort of a late baby. I'm 58. So my dad was born in 21. And, you know, his memory of the Depression was that it was sort of a non-event in that they didn't have a lot. They always had food because they grew their own food. Then I would ask the question, if we were in the group, how many of you feel like if the zombie apocalypse came, or, oh, I don't know, a pandemic where we were cut off from our food, how many of you feel as if you could survive in some fundamental way? And I can't see your hand, but I'm betting there aren't very many of you that feel you have both the knowledge or all the knowledge, the access to, and the physical capability to create a situation where you could survive. So money quite literally buys us our survival in a way that in a prior generation, it didn't quite to the same degree.
Maggie?
Yes, please.
Can I just real quick, I just want to bring up something that's in the chat room that is relevant to what you're saying, that Susan Lindner made a comment, isn't it a dangerous concept that money is a reflection of self when so many people don't have access to the system to make the money they wish? Poverty, racism, exclusion.
Yes.
So I thought, I don't know if you want to speak to that comment.
Yeah, so, right. I mean, the limitation of the comment is the idea that a self is a self-contained unit and separate and apart from all the other selves around us. And I think you're right. I think you're right to push back on that. I mean, I would say that I don't think, I guess I want to say there isn't sort of one definition. That money in our culture at the moment is this reflection, or can be a reflection, or can be understood to be a reflection of self. I think that is true. Is that what it should be is a separate question. So that it might be or that it might be perceived to be by some individuals doesn't mean that's what it should be. I mean, I think we got a long way to go, and it's a much longer conversation that I would love to have personally about what it should be and where we should be on all of these things. That it behaves that way in our culture, though, I think is true, at least for some, certainly. Okay, so just saying, what else is making money such an ick factor? I think we do have an alienated relationship to work. Very few of us get to do, very few of us get to do our soul dance and our survival dance, have that be the same dance. Almost all of us have some level of survival dance that is, if we're lucky, their dance isn't destructive to the soul dance. But actually getting those two things together, where the work you do really is reflective of what you most love in the world, and that, you know, how you provide for yourself or your families or your communities is, you know, is really deeply connected. I would say the vast majority of people don't have that experience in the way we have organized society. And then lastly, income inequality. I mean, this just goes without saying. The fact is that the tighter and tighter and tighter, and the farther and farther and farther that gets stretched. I think even the benefactors of that income inequality feel it. Now, I mean, certainly it's hard to imagine we're sitting here today and we couldn't think of people who not only love that income inequality, but will do everything they possibly can to maintain it, right? I was thinking this morning about the old saying, the golden rule, you know, whoever has the gold makes the rules. And I was pondering that, and I was thinking, you know, there's a sense in which you could flip that on its head and say, whoever makes the rules ultimately gets the gold. And the way we have constructed our society right now, where we're at right now, income inequality is an inevitability unless certain things change. And it's an inevitability because of the way the rules are structured, because of the way taxation is structured, et cetera, et cetera. Again, much longer conversation, really important conversation that we should have, that I would love to have with anybody who wants to have it. Oops. Let me flip through that. I missed it. There's my, I haven't done a PowerPoint in a while. Okay, why else is money an ick factor? I think our biology, because of the way we're constructed biologically in this social construct, if money is related directly to survival, and I would say it is, I don't think that's an arguable point under our current regime, under the current situation. Money lends itself to, and money decisions and money talk tends to go straight to the reptilian brain. That is to say, the old, you know, fear, certainly, greed, certainly, because of this, because of our connections because of the way money is connected to survival. And as a consequence, the making of money, the being in a situation of money accumulation, certainly like can be seen really as an addiction. You know, I have a family member who made $1 bajillion, hedge fund guy. He was one of those guys who traded bonds, and he made tiny, tiny slivers of money on the bonds that moved, but the amount of the bonds that moved was enormous. And so he literally became a multimillionaire and retired in his early 40s and was so agitated and so bored and so undirected in terms of how to use that money or his life. He couldn't do anything but go back to work because the endorphin rush of making money was simply something he couldn't get released from. The other thing about money in our current environment is that it cannot be avoided. That is to say, again, with very few exceptions, it's the waters we swim in. And so even if you have a really unhealthy relationship to it, as in an addiction, it's kind of like food right now. You can't just walk away from it. It's everywhere in our lives and impacts every aspect of our lives. And finally, I would say another reason why it's so fraught for us is I want to make the claim that we are also spiritual beings. This is a metaphysical claim. Not everyone might share that claim, but my way of viewing the world is that we are the kind of beings that are created with a desire for ultimate reality. That is to say, be able to actually see and feel connected to this thing larger than self, even larger than communities of people, some sort of ultimate sense. And that desire, that sort of hole in us is leveraged by consumer culture, and it helps lead us astray. Let me give you an example. Several years ago now, probably now 10 years ago, when Apple iPhones were coming out, I guess it was about 10 years ago. I have 4 children. Everybody wanted an iPhone, of course. And I didn't want to buy anybody an iPhone. You know, I didn't want to spend the money. I didn't think it was a good idea. I thought, you know, there were lots and lots of reasons why I didn't want to buy everybody an iPhone. And I was watching this commercial before Christmas. I don't know, maybe 3 weeks before Christmas. And maybe some of you have seen it. And it was this sort of alienated teenager with his family of origin at a holiday event. And he's over there on his phone, you know, kind of checked out, and the family's all like, oh, he's, you know, and they're kind of giving him a hard time for being checked out. And so this commercial went, it was like an hour. I felt like an hour. It's like 1.5 minutes, which is a long commercial. At the very end of the commercial, he comes into this family, the family group sitting around the living room, grandma, grandpa, parents, blah, 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 blah. He plugs the phone somehow into the TV, and he shows this beautiful little video movie he's made of the family. And they all start to cry. And I start to cry. And I buy everybody a damn iPhone, right? Because, right? Because it was connecting, this thing was connecting me to something that I really wanted, right? What did I want? I wanted creativity for my children. I wanted connection to my family. They weren't selling me something that dialed other people on the phone. They were selling me this whole other experience. We want all of these experiences, and our consumer culture and the brilliance of marketing knows how to connect things and knows how to separate us from our resources to buy things, to give us something that the thing, of course, ultimately can't give us. But we seek it because we have an ultimate reality shaped void inside ourselves that we're wanting to fill. Money troubles us in our human relationships. Income inequality, even small amounts of inequality, even that reality troubles us. I think as human beings, we want very, very much to be special. I don't think we all want to be different. I think those things are different. And so, you know, I would ask you to just think for a moment to yourself, if you're with someone who you know has significantly more money than you do, you know that pretty clearly, how does that make you feel? And correspondingly, if you're with someone or a group of someone's that you know for a fact have significantly less money than you do, how does that make you feel? I think we can get tremendously better at that, but those gaps, then the wider those gaps are, those trouble us. We don't really feel, I think many of us in our heart of hearts, that that's right. We don't really know how to fix that right now, I don't think. Maybe some of you have some ideas, I have some ideas. And how do we fix it and not everybody be the same and still be able to be special? Of course, there are ways to do it. But all I'm saying is that reality is troubling. And then lastly, a quote by Marianne Williams, I think this is true. I think that we actually just even unconsciously know that we are capable of great freedom and great power to change reality, that we actually really can do it. And that scares the hell out of us. That we have this, because we have this potentiality. And maybe it doesn't terrify everybody, but I think it terrifies some. It's stepping into that responsibility and into that power is a challenge. And of course, the more resource we have at our disposal, one could argue the more responsibility we have to use it in ways that create greater freedom and better relationships for others. So, okay. So what am I saying? Just like examining this relationship personally, in your own heart of hearts for starters, and then in your communities around you seems vitally important. And I think it is, I've experienced church communities, for example, go down this path, and some of them get quite far, some of them get stymied pretty quick, actually. I think for I think it's actually pretty hard work. That's been my experience. It's hard to sustain it. So, how do we begin to seek some balance here and integration? This comes with consciousness raising, and it starts with the sort of questions I asked you to begin to think about in relationship to tracking your own money memories. I often start with this question, and I've done this when I've coached individuals. I used to do money coaching on the side, sort of separate from financial planning, just for people who felt like they had a lot of money stickiness and wanted to try and work through some of that. It's the idea behind that kind of money coaching work is it can sort of border on quasi-therapy. Yeah, we have to be careful. I'm not a therapist, although, as I like to say, I play one in my office every day. But you know, I'm not a trained therapist. Money coaches are not trained therapists. The idea behind beginning to look at some of these things does presuppose a certain basic level of health. That is to say, you know, a certain level of mental health, arguably even some level of financial health. Although I've done this workshop and this work actually in a homeless shelter for women, which I thought was really, and it was a really amazing experience, and they were very engaged, people who seemingly were cut off from all sense of resource. Found it very interesting. So I think this kind of work and this tracking of memories works across boundaries. I always start with asking about the 8-year-old when I'm doing the coaching. And the reason I started asking about the 8-year-old, I don't know if there's probably some, again, I'm not a developmental psychologist. There must be something about that age range. The reason I used to just say earliest money memory or whatever, but the reason I ask about 8 is what would come up in all of these coaching sessions is somehow that just kept showing up as an age of some very significant turning, some very significant memory. And I'm wondering if there's, and maybe some of you would know this, or maybe you have training in this, I don't have, but I'm wondering if it relates to something about a kind of level of consciousness and a sort of coming out of innocence, like the beginnings of a coming out of innocence. I don't really know, but I'd ask you to think about that even just now, if you have a particular memory related to money from that age. And I'd even invite, we have a few more minutes. I'm wondering if you can think about who was involved and what particular emotions the memory invokes. This isn't the best format in which to share, right? I mean, if we were in a room together, we could do that, but I'm wondering if anybody has anything they want to share that is popping up for them. And if those of you who are watching the chat it may be not a great opportunity, or you may not feel comfortable sharing, but if anybody does, I'm happy to hear it.
So,
yeah, Meg.
Yes, this is Meg. What came up for me, I think I was a little bit younger, couple years maybe, but my first moment of that was the first moment when my family, my father made it big, and came into money. And we had this very physical thing happen, which is we were in a little flat across the street. And then we moved into this big mansion on the other side of the street. And we literally had to take all of our belongings from the one place and go to the next across the street. So there was like this whole physicality to it as well. And I would argue that that was the moment that my family sort of imploded at the same time. So money came into the mix and everything went a bit awry. First of all, physically in our new home, we were all separated all over the place. And so there was no togetherness anymore, whereas we all shared bedrooms. I'm one of 5 kids, so a lot of kids. And, you know, we all shared the same space. We were on top of each other, and that was great. There was no, that's all we knew, and it was fantastic, you know. And then all of a sudden we shared no space, you know, and everybody was separate and apart. And I think money, for me, ended up playing this really big role of having it didn't make us the least bit more happy as a family, fascinatingly so. So in fact, it went the opposite direction in my mind, or at least my evaluation of it. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with the group.
I appreciate that, Meg. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to come on? And you can feel free to unmute and come on if you'd like. Give people a minute. Anybody? Bueller?
Susan, actually, Susan Lerner just put something in the chat, and Susan, I don't know if you'd rather have me.
Sure. Yeah, I'll share. So I got my first allowance at age 8. You just clicked into that memory, which was 10 cents a week. And I was just over the moon because like 10 cents was like, wow, like 3 pieces of bazooka gum with the free comic inside, or like a tiny little notepad, like the kind reporters carried around. And I felt like Nancy Drew, or like, it felt like so much abundance to me, that 10 cents. And I could bring it to school, or I could save them up. I could get a cookie. Like I loved it. And then I didn't realize how nothing it was comparatively. Like every experience of the Tooth Fairy was just like exciting. But I also remembered, you know, tough times in my family where, you know, you'd come to dinner and there wouldn't be any meat. Like there would just be soup or eggs, or suddenly pancakes for dinner became a thing. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes that was an exciting meal, other times that was not, but either way, Dad looked really down.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, it's Liz Austin. I thought I'd share. My father always told us that we were rich, and we were anything but rich. So I went to parochial school up through the 8th grade, and so I always had a uniform. Then I went to a public school, and I got, you know, oh, I have to have cool clothes. I have to have all these great stuff. And I was telling my mother what I needed, and she said, listen, here is this is what you can spend monthly on clothes. And I actually don't remember what the amount was, but it certainly wasn't enough in my mind to get me all the cool stuff I needed to be a cool person in high school. But it taught me a very good lesson. I learned about budgeting. I learned how to stretch that money. I actually learned how to sew, because you could you could make clothes for a lot cheaper than you could buy the clothes. So that, I think, is my first real memory of money and budgeting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Others? We have some time. I love these stories personally. I think it's fascinating. I love people's stories.
It's Marta. When I was a kid, I earned the opportunity I wanted a canopy bed. Does anybody remember canopy beds? I probably date myself, but my grandfather had me help him. He had a shop where he painted these inserts that used to go into television consoles. And I would stack them up, and we would do all this. And I earned the money to buy my bed. And I knew it felt different than having it be gifted to me. And I just remember I was so proud of myself that I had earned that money. And it was such a great lesson for me. And I was probably more like 10, but it was a memory that really taught me, a day's pay for a day's work, and then the pride of earning it yourself versus having it be given to you. So it's a big memory for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Others?
I have a comment. This is Lynn. I'm going to stay off camera. I have people behind me in my house making noise, so I apologize my
No
husband and my son. So anyway, and my office is in the kitchen, so they're trying to eat something, and
Yep.
I'm telling them to shut up so that I can talk. Anyhow, so mine really goes back to, it's a combination of things where I am an only child. My mom did a really good job, I think, of just making me think that, you know, I was special and all. But somewhere, and I have to really think about this and get back to you, I acquired that fear of lack or whatever. And so I found a way to get a job at like 14, you know, as a receptionist with my, where my aunt worked. She was worked in a beauty salon, and I got to be the receptionist. That was a big deal. Then at 16, my mom and dad, I'm from Ohio, they give me a car. You can't do anything there without a car. There's no public transportation, right? You have to drive. So I got a car. That was great. But I didn't feel good about them giving me the car. So the first chance I could get, I did something really special, which kind of goes back to what Marta said about feeling like a day's work. I had to buy a battery for the car. I think it was like $58 or something like that. And I felt so responsible and so in charge, and that whole fear or lack or whatever just for that moment evaporated. It's like my car, my battery I bought, and I am driving this vehicle because, you know, I'm responsible and I'm in charge. So I think there's some connection there of feeling less fear when there is a resource like money around me. And I don't know. That's my memory.
Thank you. Thank you. I have some comments here, but I'm holding them. I want to give space just for anybody else before I go forward to share, because I think it's really interesting and helpful to hear from people. If you've got something that's come to mind and you want to share it, whether it's aligned or different is fine. Just give people a few more minutes or seconds or something.
So this is Gertrudis. So for me, I don't remember at 8 years old, but I remember my first summer job. I was 14, and it was a formal job. I worked in a local bank, and I remember with my first paycheck, I went and bought a blouse without having to ask for my mom's permission, for her opinion. As long as it was within my paycheck, didn't care about the price either. And since then, I equate money with freedom. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I finished high school, I told my parents that I was going to go to college and work at the same time because I wanted to earn my own money. For me, it was very important to have that. So where I grew up, when you go to college, most of the time you live with your parents, like you don't go away for college. Mm-hmm. So to me, earning my own money meant I didn't have to ask permission to do what I wanted to do. So if I wanted to go out, do whatever with my hair, travel, I could do it because not only I was of age, but also because I didn't have to ask my parents for money.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is Julie Hanna. That kind of reminded me of something in my past. I was going to say something else, but that really resonated with me. And it reminded me of something that, you know, in my family, it was the same kind of thing. You know, we did not have a lot of money around, and my mom was really tight with that. You know, we never got brand name anything. Everything had to be on sale. You know, I also, it resonated that, you know, sometimes you just didn't have that much food on the table and all that kind of stuff. But it was also interesting too, because my mom was very controlling, not just with money, but with everything else. And as we grew up and, you know, things got kind of better for our family, she would sort of hold on to the reins of money and use money as leverage to be able to kind of control what you did. Mm-hmm. And so I too, it's funny because I think she was so stressed about money and had such a scarcity mindset that she kind of used that as a way to control others. And so that feeling of like actually being able to make your own money and having freedom was really, really powerful for me anyway, because it reminded me of that. Because when I started to make my own money, it was like all of a sudden, you know, I could do what I wanted. I didn't have to just sort of do what somebody else wanted me to do all the time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm noticing a pattern here. Are you guys? And as some of you began to share, I was reminded of the group I'm speaking to. That is to say, one of the things in our money coaching training we've used, and I haven't shared this with you. I don't, because I wasn't sure we'd have the time to, but I'll just mention this briefly. Maybe I'll send out the exercise. Deborah Price, who was the leader of the Money Coaching Institute that I went to get my certification, like others in the field, have used certain archetypes to describe people's relationship with money. And I think of it as energies, the way our energies, the way money evokes certain responses sometimes. And sometimes it's a certain way, sometimes it's a different way, some different energies come up. But one of the energy names is the warrior. And the warrior energy is energy that connects money to empowerment, or uses money as empowerment in a healthy way. Jules, I think you were the last one to share. You were describing your mom. The description you gave of your mom sort of using money as a way to control others is kind of what we would call tyrant energy, kind of way in which money is used as a kind of a lever to keep people in line. And it's sounding like several of you gave examples of where earning, the linkage between doing something very tangible and specific and making money, and that giving you freedom and empowerment, was super important. That's a very healthy energy. It's an energy that you see in people who run successful, healthy businesses that have a fairly healthy relationship with money for the most part. Now, I'll emphasize all of us are a mix of things, and at different moments, different energies can get triggered. There's, in our topology that we use, there's 8 different energies. In contrast, Meg, when she shared at the start, was talking about the impact of sort of sudden money on her family. At least that's what it sounded like to me, Meg. You could correct me, but it sounded as if money sort of emerged quite quickly and really dramatically changed circumstances. And that, to the contrary, sounds, and it was disconnected from anything Meg in her life did, just happened to her. When things happen to us, especially when money just falls into our laps, it can be very disorienting and sometimes very destructive. Witness the lottery winners, for example, who, I don't know what the statistics are, something like 90% don't have any of that money left after 2 or 3 years. So this disconnect between doing and earning. So the connection between earning and money is both healthy and also, I guess I'm just thinking out loud here in the way in which it can also potentially create certain distortions. It can lend itself to an assumption that if someone is disconnected from money or doesn't have any, that they're just not working hard enough or just not trying enough. I'm not suggesting any of you are saying this. I'm simply saying that that energy and the way that energy gets used can get leveraged in that kind of way, sometimes in a helpful way, sometimes in a not very helpful way. But it doesn't surprise me that a lot of you today on the call, my understanding is you are business women, you make things happen in your life, that this would be your connection to money, or a big part of it. Makes a lot of sense to me. So I didn't hear anyone other than Meg's with particularly negative memory. Most of you were able to turn it to empowerment. Is there anyone out there for whom that 8-year-old memory that you want to share was a particularly negative memory? That may be asking a lot in a group. If nobody wants to share, I understand, but just tossing it out there.
I can share, Maggie.
Hey.
When I was younger, I was in 7th grade, and or 6th grade, I was in a public school and for a number of years, and then my parents moved me to a private school, and there was a very stark difference for me in terms of my own sort of sense of, do we have money as a family? Do we not have money? When I actually had the conversation, so I was talking to you earlier, with my mom for my money memories, and she said, "Yeah, I remember you asking me, like, are we rich? Are we not rich?" Like, not really knowing. And when I went to the private school, feeling for the first time shame around that sort of compare and despair, and what did that mean about me as the new person who didn't have anywhere near what all these seemed like everybody else had.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was the first time that I unconsciously, but thinking, well, what does that mean about me if
Mm-hmm.
I don't have what others have? And
Well,
yeah, so that was definitely a horrible time.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for being willing to share that. So I'm aware we're at time or thereabouts. This is a two-part workshop-y thing, and sort of workshop-y thing. And you'll get exercises for the next part, which is beginning to look forward towards your, your own vision for your own life. I suspect I'm working with people here who probably have some sense of where they want to go and what they want to do and what they care about. So part of next time we'll be thinking about the relationship between money and time, because it is, I would argue, money is inextricably linked to time. As a carbon-based unit, we only have so much time. We only can spend so much time, and of course, if you knew when you were going to die, as a financial planner, the most important piece of information we really need is when you're going to die. We'll tell you what to do. We'll tell you what to do tomorrow. Well, or at least we'll suggest some things to you. So that unknowing of that and the tension of that in relationship to how we accumulate and spend for now and into the future, we'll talk about that. And just begin to think about, I'll try and get to next time some more tangible things to think about as you think about trying to spend, save, invest, give, etc. all of our activities with money. So I just want to thank you all very, very much for the opportunity to be with you today. I wish I could be with you in a little bit more intimate way than we are, but I just very much appreciate all of you who were willing to share and engage, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of that next time. And I think I need to turn it over to Megan.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. First of all, huge thanks. It was so enjoyable to have you with us and to actually talk about an issue that's, I think, often hard for women to talk about, or I'll admit it to about myself. Talking about money is uncomfortable. So thank you for making it a safe space to delve in and think about why that is, and and I'm really looking forward to the session on actually July 8th, everyone. Diane will be sending information around of when Maggie's going to speak with us again, and it's really more about how do you make your money work for you, which I think will be fantastic. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm sure you all too. There were three things that that really struck me when I was listening to everyone and to some of the comments Maggie was making. So I just thought I would share them. One was this notion about our survival dance versus the soul dance. And I thought that was a really fascinating concept that's struck me. So throughout this whole conversation, I've been thinking about what does that mean for me and in my life. I thought that was really interesting. I loved the stories that were shared by so many, and the way, Maggie, you sort of wrap that up around money as empowerment. That's a really interesting notion. As many of you know, I'm fascinated by the flow of money because I think if we all really paid attention to the flow of money, we might be able to solve some of these inequities that we're seeing everywhere in our world today. And so I think that's a very serious conversation to have, and it's fascinating that we're getting to have that in the world, the societal context in which we're currently living. Anyway, I just invite that. I've always said the way to get the change done for women is get more money flowing to women, and I think I could say that for all of the racial inequities that we're experiencing now too. You know, so. Anyway, lots of work to be done. The only other thing I wanted to mention to the whole community is I hope that we're, besides Maggie coming back and speaking with us again in July, and Diane will be sending around that information July 8th. We also have a session later this month on June 24th. It's a courtside chat with Katrina Adams, and she is the former president and chair of USTA. So she is a total dynamo and really fascinating background and experience, and I think you will really enjoy that conversation. So if you can make it, please mark it on your calendar. And Diane's been sending out information about it, so in case you missed it, you know, pay attention. And then one of the other things I wanted to just mention is to remind folks that Quorum, since we're now operating in this virtual world, has created a digital membership. So if you haven't joined us, we have just an incredible lineup of curriculum through the rest of the year and into 2021. And we would hate for you to miss out on being a more integral part of the community. So please reflect on whether that makes sense for you to become a digital member. And I guess my action, because we always leave Quorum meetings with action, my one action request to everybody, besides putting dates on the calendar and joining us on these future in this future curriculum, is to just for all of us to think about the flow of money right now, given everything that's happening in our world. And so what does it mean, and how are we participating, and how are we showing up? So anyway, I'll leave you with that, because I think it's a worthy moment for us all to take a minute to reflect. And great to see all these familiar faces. Maggie, thanks again for leading us in this wonderful session, and look forward to speaking and seeing all of you soon.
It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Take care. Bye-bye.